Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I'll be your host. So today I'm joined with Lauren Klein. How you doing today, Lauren?
I'm doing great, Kirk. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So Lauren, before we begin, dive right in. Tell us a bit about your background.
Absolutely. So I am a tax and trust and estates attorney. I'm located in Florida. Work with clients, across the state as well as across the country with federal tax planning. So I focus exclusively on tax and estates. So what does that really mean? I know we're going to dive into it, but a lot of, wills and trusts, protecting minor children, protecting businesses from probate, making sure that everything is tax efficient, and really making sure that families are protected. I've been in this industry now for 13 years, and I've seen a lot of, good plans, bad plans, a lot of misinformation, especially in this day and age with, social media. There's a lot of information going around. So excited to dive into all of that today. On a personal note, I'm a mom of two little boys. I'm also an adjunct professor, so I can put on my wills and trusts adjunct professor hat a little bit today as well. But really excited to be on the show and hopefully make a topic that I think a lot of people find a little morbid or boring, actually interesting and empowering for your audience.
Nice. You're a boy mom. Yeah, we got two boys as well.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, that's great.
The
That's great.
best, the
Um,
best.
so tell us. So let's start. Let's just start at a high level. So talk about the estate and probate process and what that looks like, generally speaking.
Sure. So it depends on the state where everyone listening resides, but the general idea is if I own, say, a brokerage account in my individual name, I haven't named any beneficiaries, or I did and maybe they passed away, or I haven't moved it into a trust. In order for that account, when I pass away, to get to either people I've named as my beneficiaries in my estate plan, that's called testate. To get to those individuals, it has to go through probate. I'll talk about what that is in a second. But if I haven't named any beneficiaries or I haven't moved it into a trust, then it has to go through what's called an intestate estate, which basically means the state where you reside picks who your beneficiaries are. So typically it's spouse, children, parents, siblings, and so on and so forth, depending on your family dynamic. But if those assets go through that probate process, it essentially means in many states, like Florida, where I practice, you must hire a lawyer. Everything goes before a judge who oversees the entire process. It's very expensive. It can cost anywhere from three, seven, or even more of your estate, which, as you can imagine, when you add up your estate, that can get, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it can become quite expensive. It can take anywhere from 6 months to a year to get from your estate to your beneficiaries, which can be anywhere from frustrating, or disastrous. Let's say you have a spouse that everything's in one name and the other spouse doesn't have access anymore, or children don't have access, to funds. It can be very, very scary. And another piece of the probate experience, if you will, is that everything becomes public information. So, especially in today's day and age, I know I don't want all of my information out there for scammers or anyone else to have access to. So, really, the probate process, probate administration is something that you want to avoid at all costs, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I guess that cost is before people start fighting, right?
Well, that's a whole other ball game. So either if it's unclear, there's no plan. If there's probate litigation, I mean, a standard probate litigation is going to cost $50,000 plus. It's very expensive, very emotional. And usually, they say the only people who win are the attorneys.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Of course, I've worked with a lot of clients over the years, and I think I've only met one family that didn't fight after somebody died. Like everybody else
Mm,
does had theirs, and it's not necessarily the family. It's usually some weird uncle or this crazy aunt that no one's ever heard of. Like these people come out of the woodworks when people die, and they're like, "I object," and they it just causes problems. So it's not
yeah.
always ridiculous like immediate family, but it's always somebody.
Yeah.
Where do you think that
Yeah.
stems from? Like, because you probably see this a lot. Like, why do people just do this? Like, all of a sudden when somebody dies, even though they probably don't have any right to it.
I think that there's so many reasons, and I think a lot of it just boils down to money often makes people a little crazy. And I think a lot of it is really based on its emotions. It's past vendettas, it's thinking there's something owed, or maybe something at some point was a joint family asset and something got mixed up with inheritance, at the level of, maybe the decedent's own parents. I think so often it is based on emotions. I think it's also based on greed, a lot of the times. But I think at the end of the day, we are all human beings doing the best we can. And our inner child sometimes just hasn't healed from past experiences. But I see it all the time. And it's not that you can avoid it entirely, but when you have a very clear estate plan that was well crafted and the attorney took the time to ask you questions about your family, it can really help to avoid or mitigate those issues.
So that brings up another issue because I see a lot of people do estate plans. Like most people
Mhm.
that I run into, they have some sort of estate plan. Maybe it's just a
Mhm.
will, but they're almost always going into probate. Even if somebody has a
Mhm.
trust, I feel like
Mhm.
the attorneys, there's always something missing where it causes it to go into probate, even though it probably should be avoiding probate. So why is that? Like why are so many people going to probate, even the ones that are have a relatively well-crafted estate?
Okay, so I love this question so much. I did not give you this question, but it's almost as if I did, because this is something that I am overly passionate about. I think it's something that is very broken in my area of law. And I agree. I see it time and time again. I have a number of reasons I think this is, but the reality is we get a lot of probates where people did have all of their estate plans. And my law partner was formerly a corporate fiduciary with one of the big banks, and she saw it all the time. The clients had an estate planning attorney, they had a financial advisor, and boom, they still had a probate. So the main reasons that this occurs is one, if you don't have an estate planning attorney that helps you fund your trust from the get-go, that is a problem. What happens most often, a client goes in, they get their will and their trust, they're feeling really good. They're like, I did my homework, I did what I had to do, check it off the list, put it on the shelf. And likely your attorney gave you a letter in that binder of documents that was entitled Trust Funding Instructions if you had a trust. If you didn't have a trust, then, there's ways to avoid probate we can talk about. But let's just go with the will trust scenario. And you don't do anything. You think you're good. You think you checked off your box. 20, 30, 40, 50 years go by and you pass away. So from the get-go, you didn't have assets moved into a trust. So remember how you go through probate. You own something individually. You haven't named a beneficiary. You don't have a joint holder, or it's not owned in a trust. Remember that. So, and then now all these years have gone by, you've acquired new accounts, you've bought new real estate, you've had grandchildren, and nothing was updated, that whole time. Or maybe you updated it a few times, but your assets were not probate proofed. And so, your family is going to be surprised to find that even though they thought, mom and dad had everything in place, now they're losing money to attorney's fees and court fees. So I think a lot of it is just the transaction. Our area is very transactional. So documents are done, boom, the client leaves the door. They don't connect again unless maybe a major life event happens like death, divorce, something of that nature. Another reason that I think it happens often, and this is a little bit of the darker side of our industry, as attorneys, as trust and estates attorneys, we make a lot of money when we have a probate. So I don't want to poo-poo too much on my colleagues, but I've heard this from the horse's mouth. We'll do their plan and then we'll get their probate on the back end. So it's, a little bit of double dipping. And it does happen, unfortunately. But I think mostly what is happening is there's just no process in place for the client and the attorney to stay on top of what is happening in their lives. That is the biggest issue.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, cool. So what are some of the biggest challenges that people face in going to probate? Like when you're talking to them, what are what are the things that people struggle with most?
Well, number one, a loved one has just passed away. So you're grieving the passing of a spouse, of a child, of a parent, of a beloved aunt or uncle. So you're dealing with that. So you're already not in your normal mindset. Now you find out, hey, we thought they had something, or maybe they have something, but it wasn't fully, going to protect it from probate, like we're talking about, or maybe they never got around to doing it. So now on top of the grief and, the emotional side, you now have to deal with hiring that attorney, figuring out where all the assets are, figuring out how they're titled, taking a lot of time and a lot of money to eventually get the assets to hopefully to the individuals that that person, intended. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes someone has predeceased and there wasn't language in place, what happens next. Sometimes there's a divorce and that causes an issue of whether they are a beneficiary or not. Sometimes children are getting assets at the age of 18 or 20 or 21 when they are not yet emotionally mature enough to handle, receiving an inheritance. But I think the biggest thing is you're dealing with now the death of someone and this whole other administrative task that is very draining.
Yeah. Yeah, the emotional part makes this whole thing really challenging for sure. Um, so do people, I mean, every state's a little different, so it makes it a little bit challenging to have these broad strokes. But for sure, like I get a lot of, well, I read that you can do X. Like, what are those things
Mhm.
that you hear a lot that people are like, well, I heard you could do this. Why can't I do this? Like, what are
Yeah.
those pieces that you hear most?
I think the biggest thing that I see is people thinking that they can get a revocable trust in place, they can move everything in, they will never pay taxes again, creditors can never find them, and they're just going to be able to hide from everybody. And that's not the case. There's so many benefits to revocable trust planning, but during your life, asset protection is not typically one of them. So that's one of the biggest things that we hear. Or, I think another big issue can be the price. Sometimes people think, well, it's very simple. It's a will, it's a one pager. I'm going to come in, spend $500. And the reality is there are attorneys out there who do very, very, low cost estate plans, but they will not ask you questions. It will be very cookie cutter. They won't help you fund the trust. So you've done something, but how beneficial is it really? Another thing we see is people coming in and they've maybe done some of their own, DIY estate planning or DIY probate avoidance, but maybe then they're causing major tax issues. So, for example, if someone is gifted a property during life, and we're going to get a little tax nerdy here, they're giving someone their basis. So if I bought a property, let's say I bought a piece of real estate for $100,000 and I'm giving it to somebody as a gift, they're taking my tax basis typically of $100,000. But if instead they inherit that property from me, they'll get a date of death value. So as their basis. So if I bought it for 100,000, but I'm in South Florida, that $100,000 house is now $1 million house. And I know that's happening all over the country. They can inherit that tax basis if they sell it the next day. They don't pay any capital gains tax. So that's another thing that we see frequently. But I think the biggest question we're getting is how can I hide from creditors, from the IRS, from, Medicaid with very little planning when that's not often the case.
So you mentioned irrevocable trusts don't really give any asset protection. What's the point of a revocable trust if there's no asset protection?
So the revocable trust with the assets that you move into it or name the trust as a beneficiary, probate avoidance is huge. That's a big part of the planning. It's also orderly administration of estates, your estate. So if you pass away and you're married, do you want assets to go outright to a spouse or in trust to a spouse? Maybe you say, well, we have a blended family, so I want to make sure that I know what happens to those assets when my spouse passes. You probably wanted to stay in trust. Or maybe you say, look, if my spouse were to get remarried and have more children, that's okay. But anything that they're inheriting from me, I want to go to my own children. Or maybe you say, well, everything can go out right to a spouse, but I want assets to stay in trust for my children. And that's when a lot of the creditor protection comes in, even without more complex planning. So let's say, for example, I have two boys. I have assets staying in trust for them indefinitely. The reasons I have done that is I've effectively given them prenups. So if they get married and they get divorced, the assets are protected from their ex-spouse as a creditor because they don't own it. It's owned on their behalf, even if they're their own trustee at a certain age. Also, I've now given them creditor protection. So I said that the revocable trust doesn't give you creditor protection, but I've died, so my trust is now irrevocable. So if they are, physicians or they get into a car accident or something happens where they're getting sued, I've now given them creditor protection. And there's estate tax protection once that trust becomes irrevocable. So right now in the US, if you're a US citizen or permanent resident, you can give away or die with about $14 million per spouse. So a very high dollar amount. That number used to be much lower. When my parents did their first estate plan, it was around $1 million. So many more people had taxable estates. We don't know what that number could be. So I've also given my children estate tax protection on those assets that they keep within a trust. So there are still an immense number of benefits to the revocable living trust. If you have a need for more creditor protection or you have significant assets, that's when you start exploring irrevocable trust planning. Trusts for that are not able to be changed easily, like a revocable trust. Another benefit, it's easy to modify. The irrevocable trust provides more protection from creditors and things of that nature, but it's more expensive to set up. So it has to be the right facts and circumstances to warrant, that irrevocable trust.
Okay,
Or
so
like a special needs trust, for example. Sometimes those are irrevocable for certain reasons as well.
so the revocable becomes irrevocable once the person passes, and that's what gives them creditor protection or divorce protection. Okay, cool.
Correct.
Uh,
Exactly.
all right, so um, outside of it sounds like irrevocable trusts are not ideal, but if people want creditor protection, what are some, and maybe this is more advanced, but what are some things people should be thinking about? What are the best
Yeah.
ways to
And
protect themselves?
Absolutely. So it depends where you're located. The rules are going to be different, but some things to think about are, like in Florida, we have homestead. So homestead property, there's a lot of people who move down here and buy very expensive homes because homestead in Florida gives significant creditor protection. So you're going to want to check with your attorney to see if within your state, your primary residence receives some asset protection. There's also ways to own businesses to make sure that you are the most creditor protected. For example, in Florida, if there's a single owner, you have some, let's say a single member LLC, you have some creditor protection. But if you have a multi-member LLC, you have much more protection in place. There's also, life insurance and retirement accounts can have some creditor protection as well, depending on where you're located. And then even if you aren't quite ready or your facts don't warrant that irrevocable trust, having the revocable trust that becomes irrevocable is huge. Also, things like who's on the title to your car. Maybe you don't have both spouses on the titles to your car. Or maybe you own things. There's something called tenants by the entireties, which is a special ownership right between spouses. Maybe you own things as spouses intentionally to make sure that if one spouse gets sued, the creditors cannot attach to those assets that are held in that form. I think the most important thing is when you meet with an estate planning attorney, listing out your assets, explaining your creditor protection concerns, or saying, hey, I want to make sure that everything is protected as possible, because that is a piece of what any, good estate planning attorney will do for you.
Cool. So one question that's come up recently is how do people handle cryptocurrency? Like that's a weird new asset, and I haven't heard many people talking about it. So are you seeing a lot of that now?
We are actually right before this got off a call with a client who has Bitcoin. So we always ask, if they fill out their questionnaire and they don't specify what type of cryptocurrency it is, we dig deeper because depending on the type of cryptocurrency, sometimes you are able to easily probate proof it. And other times it's not as easy. It depends. Even similar to, just traditional financial institutions will have different rules for how you can set up accounts and how you can name beneficiaries. It's kind of the same, with various types of cryptocurrency. So for example, the potential client, now going to be client that we just got off the call with, they have Bitcoin. And they hold it in a cold wallet. So with Bitcoin, you are, at least as of today, able to move that interest or assign that interest to your trust, to your revocable trust or your irrevocable trust. In this case, they just needed the revocable trust for now as they continue to build wealth. There's other types of crypto, however, that you are not able to move it into your revocable trust. So it's very important when you're interviewing an estate planning attorney, if you have these types of assets, that you ask, do you know how to analyze whether this can be moved into my trust or not? To make sure that you are probate proofing. Another really important thing is not even just the probate avoidance on the crypto, which is obviously very, very important. I think that's becoming clear. Like probate is not good, typically not a good thing. You also want to make sure that your family and your beneficiaries can access it, both during life, if something happens to you, if you become incapacitated, and following life. Because if that key or the information to get into that crypto is lost, and I have seen this happen, there can be significant sums of money that you can no longer get access to, or you may not be able to get access to if you're not able to get in. So having a secure place where you have all of the information about all of your assets, not just cryptocurrency, that your family can locate. We see it all the time with probates. We're like, we have to go on a treasure hunt with the family member to determine what assets they had, what institutions the accounts were with, all the real estate. Sometimes clients have like some funky piece of land, in another part of the state that the children didn't even know about. Do you have a list of all of your assets, how they're titled? If it's an account, do you have, account numbers? Do you have some sort of password manager? And do you have this in a place where your loved ones, your family can access in the event something happens to you?
Yeah, no, I was always curious about crypto because it's really, I mean, how do you put that into a trust? You have to declare it and you have to how do you title it? I mean, it's not really titled in the same way. Do you just kind of write it into the trust as this is an asset, or how do you do it?
Yeah, yeah. So you check with each company. So for example, Bitcoin has steps to do this, and they say if you do these things, this will avoid probate. Now, I've seen it work specifically on Bitcoin, but I think as time goes on and as more and more people who have crypto pass away, I think we're going to see sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't work. But right now, we are doing assignments into trust. We're making it very clear within the trust document. We are keeping all of the information clear so the trustee will have access to that information. So it's both legally, transferring without a probate and accessible. I think those are the two key things that you need to look at.
Okay, that makes sense. So if let's say, I mean, you got two young boys. Let's say you're planning for them. Like what should let's say you had like 20, 30 years, you had plenty of time and you had some, let's say you're starting a business today. Like what are some things people can think about well in advance so it doesn't become this oh crap moment of I got to do something today. So what can people think about if they're so inclined to think way in advance?
I think the biggest thing, honestly, and it's going to sound extremely simple, is just get started. It's the hardest part. A lot of people don't want to talk about this stuff and think about this stuff. But when you kind of switch the way you view it as, oh, estate planning, I don't want to have to think about that, or I'm too young, or I don't have enough money. Think about it as this is an extension of my financial plan. So get started, find an attorney that you know, like, and trust, ask your friends and family, find someone, interview a few, it's like dating, like find one that you like because you will be with them for a while as your estate grows and as your life changes. And then I think starting to build your team is so important. So depending on, what phase you are in the wealth building journey of your life, having your estate planning attorney on your team, having your financial advisor, if that makes sense, on your team, having, maybe if you are investing in real estate, your realtor and your mortgage broker, a very good CPA or accountant, and make sure that everyone knows each other and is working together. Because for even for those who maybe are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're kind of in that still in that accumulation phase, you need to have that team in place. And then I think another thing to consider is a lot of people, when your kids are young, like mine are very young, I don't know who they're going to be yet. So there's so many like, well, this could happen and that could happen. And yeah, maybe my parents could be the guardians today, but in 10 years or 5 years, they wouldn't be able to. I think so many times people, they're thinking so forward, and it's like you have to focus on the here and now, the facts and circumstances as they stand today, and make a decision based on that. Because as life goes on, you can change it as long as you're alive and you have capacity, you can update that. So get started, make your decisions with the information you have today, create a good team, and really make sure that, I can especially speak to my piece. Make sure that the person is going to help you fund your trust, does have a system for helping you keep all of your assets in one place, including, the key, the passwords and keys to accounts and crypto. Make sure that they have that in place already. That's part of their firm's processes and procedures. Make sure that ask them, do you meet with your clients every year? That's what we do. We say every single year, we're going to talk, we're going to see what's going on free of charge, just because you are our client. And let's just see, what needs to be done. And if nothing, it was a great time to catch up. And then, making sure that the way you hold things and title things, and, obviously I'm not a financial advisor, but making sure that you are taking those steps to grow your wealth, depending on whether you're a business owner or an entrepreneur. Are you being tax efficient? Are you being savvy from a retirement perspective? Are you taking advantage of, the most deductions that you can? All of these things are part of a healthy money mindset, and they do all add up.
Awesome. So before we leave, I just have to ask, and this doesn't have to be your story, but what's like the craziest story you've heard that's public that you're not giving away anything secret? Like what's the craziest thing you've seen in the estate planning process?
Oh man. So I have two. I have one that's kind of like one of those like wild situations, and then I have one that's just kind of we see all the time. I'll do that one quickly. A lot of the times we see with blended families, and we got a call about a year ago from someone, hey, my dad set up a will with my stepmom. Everything was my dad's, but he gave everything outright to her with me as the backup beneficiary in both of their estate plans. Dad dies, stepmom survived. Now stepmom is changing the will entirely, writing out that stepchild. What can I do? And we said there's nothing you can do unless there's incapacity issues or undue influence or something interesting and weird going on like that. It went outright to stepmom. So that's not the most exciting of stories, but that's something we see all the time. And like, can you imagine like your parent has passed away and now you're not getting any of your inheritance that he worked for and he intended for you to get. The other thing that I saw one time that was I mean, I have so many, but the one that popped into my head first was there was a client who had a girlfriend, a partner. They weren't married. He was in his 80s and she was in her, I think, 40s, maybe early 50s, and they decided to have a child together. But because he's in his 80s, they had to do some medical procedures for her to get pregnant. It was his child, but they had to go through some procedures. When he passed away, they were no longer together at that point. His estate took the position that he was not the legal father, he was a sperm donor. And therefore, the child was not entitled to his inheritance. He was not entitled to, in Florida, that means if you're the legal child, you get an interest in the homestead property. In this case, it was a very expensive, I think it was like a $25 million, homestead property. And the estate took the position that he was not the father. He was like, I feel like we're on like, Maury Povich, you are not the father. And at the trial level, the estate won. Believe it or not, it's on appeal. But this is not a case I was involved in. It's a colleague. But at the trial level, the estate won, which is absolutely absurd to me based on the facts. Like there, he was at the kids' birthday parties. It was not a sperm donor situation. But that was definitely one of the craziest things that I've seen, thus far. And I've seen a lot of stuff, but that one really kind of took me for a loop. And there's another one I wanted to share about really quick. Let me see. My law partner just texted it to me. Let me see. Well, we can keep chatting and I'll find it, but I thought it was also very crazy.
Yeah, I've seen yeah, the ones I've seen, I don't see too many crazy ones, but the worst ones I've seen are when somebody has a life insurance policy and then they die and then they forget to update it. So it's like they get
Yeah.
divorced and they get remarried and it's still going to the ex-wife or the ex-husband
Hmm.
and they forgot to
Hmm.
update it. Like I've seen
Hmm.
that more than a handful of times in my 25 years doing this. It's just, it's
Yeah.
nuts. And usually you're there too late. You know, it's like nothing you can do. But
Yeah.
many times I'm there and I catch it. I'm like, what the hell? Like, you
I
need to
know.
update that. And they're like, yeah, I'll get around to it. I'm like, really? Maybe you should do that right now.
I know. I know. So some states now have a provision in laws, depending on whether it's the will or life insurance or whatever it might be, that the divorce basically invalidates that person as a beneficiary, as if they had predeceased, to try to prevent that from happening. But it depends on, again, on the state where you live. So in the state where you live, so it's really, really important that you touch base with your estate planning attorney at if there's a death in the family, there's a divorce, there's a new baby, there's an adoption, anything that's happening that's like you move states, anything like that that's a major life event, you definitely want to touch base with your attorney. And I found what my law partner texted me the other day was the Hermes heir left about $11 billion, it looks like, to his former gardener. So that's a lucky former gardener right there, man.
Wow. Yeah, he had a pretty awesome garden. $11
Yeah,
billion? Jesus.
crazy, crazy,
Oh,
crazy.
that's nuts. That's nuts. Well, that's the craziness when people start leaving their estate to their cat and all that. I saw that happen, what, once in New York, somebody did that. Some crazy, some woman who's single or whatever, she left her estate to her cat. She's really wealthy, but
Yeah, yeah, we I'll talk about it in a little bit, but I have a new podcast coming out, and our first episode is like the craziest things you've seen in wills. And one of the stories is about was it Leona Hemsley, I think
yeah,
her name was, in New York with the dog, and the Queen of Mean left, all this money to the dog, and the family challenged it, and the court reduced, the amount that the little pup got.
yeah, that's Oh man. Well, it's great talking to you, Lauren. What are some
Likewise.
final thoughts before we wrap it up here, and then where can people find more about you?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that I just see day in and day out is so many people just don't take that first step. And, I think it really is a way, having a good financial plan, number one. So obviously if you're listening, to this podcast, you already are thinking about it. So you're a step ahead of most. But making sure that your estate planning piece is really, you've started it. A lot of people just think it's not that fun, it's not relevant. But it doesn't matter how old you are or what assets you have, you need something. You need something in place. Even if you're 18, get a power of attorney and a healthcare surrogate, because your parents no longer have access to your healthcare information or your money because you are now an adult. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize. It's for everybody. And then your estate plan grows with you as you grow. But don't let your assets get lost to probate, because it's a way that you really inhibit that building of generational wealth. I know that phrase is kind of overused right now, but it really is true. So just reach out, find someone, that you can talk to in your city, your state, and start getting it in place. The investment is well worth it.
Nice. Where can people find more about you?
Absolutely. So I'm very active on Instagram. You can find me at lawyer Lauren Klein, and then it'll lead to, my law firm page. And I also have courses and a community for lawyers and law students talking a lot about money as well, and a lot of these same topics. And then I'm very active as well on YouTube, same at lawyer Lauren Klein. We're actually going to be starting a new free estate planning series, a lot of these same topics, but diving into them a little bit deeper on YouTube. How do I get started? What is an estate plan? What do these different things mean? Because there's definitely a huge need for that information out there. And then the podcast that I alluded to, we have a new podcast coming out called Serious Trust Issues. It's myself, my law partner. It's a family law attorney, and then a realtor who specifically deals with probate, talking about our experiences, talking about fun things like the craziest, will provisions you've ever seen, haunted houses, really making it interesting, but also providing a lot of education and value. And that will be available wherever you find your podcast.
Awesome. Well, Lauren, I really appreciate you coming to the show and sharing your wisdom with us. We'll definitely have you back on in the future because I know the world is not short of interesting stories about estates. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Kirk. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. I mean, like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room. All right. Well, that was a great interview with Lauren. Really appreciate her coming on the show. Now we're into the panel portion of the show where we have our very own Phil Weiss. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Kirk, happy to be here. Good topic to remind people of.
Yeah, glad to have you. And we also have our very own Barb Freeberg. Hey, Barb.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. A little freaked out here, reminding me of everything I have to do.
All right. Well, let's dive right in. So, Phil, what are some of your takeaways from the interview?
There's a lot of things that Lauren talked about that are just really important to remember. It's when it comes to your assets, a lot of times we make a lot of assumptions about things, but those assumptions aren't what happens. I mean, she talked in there about naming beneficiaries. We don't think about that, but it's really important. Number one, as she talked about it, when you pass away, the importance of having those beneficiaries so that your assets don't have to go through probate. But there's a lot of other reasons to do that. Just a lot of important points to keep in mind, making sure that people know how to access, your family knows how to access your account if something happens to you. That's important. Making sure that you have your healthcare designations and things like that in place, not just you, for your kids. Just a lot of really important things that she brought up. And as we go into it, I'll be happy to share some stories about them, but just all things that we really need to remember. And this is something that we often want to put off because we don't want to think about our dying, right? It's really hard to think about that. So it's really easy to put this off and wait till another day. But the best way to address it is to deal with it head on and take care of it. And it's an important part of financial planning. Like, we spend all our time trying to build assets, and hopefully when we're gone, we've done a good job of doing that. And we want to make sure that they're handled properly when we're gone. So there's just a lot of things that you really need to address.
Yeah, agreed. Barb, what about you? What are some of your takeaways?
Well, I agree with obviously what Phil was saying, but a key thing is it's not only about building wealth because once you reach a certain level, you want to make sure that your money is protected, your money is managed properly, and if you die or get sick, it's going to be handled well. It's going to go to whomever you want. The story Lauren told about the blended family where the wife wrote her ex, her dead husband's kids out of the will is a cautionary tale. And the problem with this stuff is it's kind of fun to invest and watch your net worth grow. I mean, that's enjoyable for many of us. And whether we work with a financial advisor or we do it on our own, you kind of choose a strategy. And over time, most of us, if we stick to it, will see benefits. But there's a whole nother side to that, which is you have to manage it well. You have to make sure that you're investing tax efficiently. And you also have to make sure that when you die, it's not going to be hard for your family to access all those assets because I mean, in the past 10 years, Bob and I have lost both our parents, his uncle, and we've gone through a lot of estate situations. And regardless of the size of the estate, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of accounts that you may have to find. And so doing this planning now, I will say personally, is not fun. It's not fun writing down every account you have, the account number, how to get access to it, the password to the account, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really important to make it a priority.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think those are important points. Phil, so tell us, you mentioned some stories. So tell us some crazy stories you've experienced with some of your clients or otherwise.
Sure. So one of the first ones I want to share is I know Lauren mentioned the idea of having a healthcare power of attorney when your kids go away to college. It's something that a lot of people don't think about. But one of my sons had a friend whose brother went away to college. They live in Maryland, and the boy went to college in Ohio. And he was out jogging one morning and he got hit by a truck. And fortunately, he was okay. I will tell you this, right? So you don't worry about that part. But his mother had no idea what happened to him, and she couldn't find out anything until she got on a plane and got to Ohio and got there because since her son was over 18, there was no obligation on the part of the hospital. They can't tell you anything without having permission. So that healthcare power of attorney, it gives you permission to talk to somebody to find out what's going on. So it's really important that you get that permission when your child goes away to college. It's like when I have clients who send kids away to school, I recommend to them that they do that. And I even have a document that I can send them. Now it's not customized for every state, but it's usually good enough so that if something happens to your child while they're away at school, you have a way to find out what's going on instead of being in fear until you get there. If something like what I described happens. The other thing, early in my career, I guess even before my career really started, I lived in Arizona and I worked for the public fiduciary's office. And the role of that office was to serve as guardian or conservator or personal representative if there wasn't a family member there. And I remember when somebody would pass away and we had to serve as personal representative, we'd go to their house and you would check their mail. And why are you checking the mail? Because you're trying to find out if they have any accounts, any statements, and they would come in the mail. Guess what? Now, nobody gets statements in the mail because you have to pay for them. It's a hassle. They don't want you to get any statements. They want to email you everything. So if you don't have an idea of what kind of accounts somebody has, you're not going to know, and assets can be lost. The only way you might be able to find out is at tax time, because a lot of times 1099s are mailed, but not always. You're still going to miss some. So that's really important. So one of the things that I like to do for clients when they start is even if they don't use it, it's just to remind them the importance, because there's other ways to do this online, but I send them a password book. And that password book they can use to record all their accounts, how to access them, so that if something happens, people know how. If you have an online password manager, which is actually a better method, you can give somebody like an emergency password so that if something happens to you, they can get in and access your accounts. And the one thing that Lauren didn't mention when she was talking about those accounts is don't forget about social media. Because if something happens to you, your social media profiles, they can stay there, they can be hacked, they can be spammed, any kind of things can happen to them. So you want to make sure that you've properly addressed those so that they can be shut down or at least frozen if something happens to you. And then the last one is there was a story in the Wall Street Journal, it's probably about a year ago now, about this guy. He was dating this woman and he had a 401k. And he named her as this woman that he was dating as the beneficiary. They separated years, I want to say it's like 15, 20 years later, he died. Even though it was Procter and Gamble who he worked for, sent him requests to update the beneficiary. He didn't. So guess who got the money when he passed? The ex-girlfriend. And his brothers and other family members took it to court. But it was really a waste of time because the law is really clear that beneficiary designations trump anything else. Even if it was in his will, it wouldn't matter. The beneficiary designation is what is the deciding factor. So that's really important. It also applies, if you get divorced, make sure that you take your ex off as beneficiary on all your accounts because guess what? Something happens to you and you didn't change it, they get the money. That's probably not what you want. So just a lot of little instances like that to remind you of the importance of taking care of these things.
Yeah, it's funny because there's so much that goes into this. You have to be like a Sherlock Holmes sleuth to kind of go through all this stuff, and you have to be an engineer to create a system to keep track of it. Every once in a while, I think about like, all right, I can update my stuff, and then I realize the complexity. I'm just like, all right, I'm just going to do this later, just like everyone else. It's not dealing with death part that bothers me. It's the fact that you have to think through every part of your life and what is where and what you need to keep different places. And as Phil said, you almost need like a centralized place to put everything so that, like passwords, statements. I mean, I love the fact you said the online statement thing. I hadn't even thought of that. Like that's actually getting worse. So people don't even know. I will say that in the worst case scenario, if you wait like 2 years, you will end up you'll end up finding out through like the state website because it'll go into receivership and the state keeps custody of all that stuff. And you just go to the state website and it'll say, all right, here's you look up your name and then it'll be like, all right, John Smith, and they'll say, all right, John Smith has this many accounts. So you could do that now. Like I went there like a few years ago and I realized there was a bunch of I had some stock dividends that I hold, the actual certificate. So I get the dividends. And I realized there's like, I don't know, $2 outstanding in the state for this stock. I'm like, where did that go? I didn't realize it wasn't there. And so point being is that stuff doesn't disappear. It has to go somewhere. And I don't know if all 50 states do this. I know Massachusetts does, and I know most states do at least. But if worst case, you can always find it there, even if it's just years later.
Yeah, you just go look for like unclaimed property in the state because I know I've
Yep.
done that and found like there's something that we found from my mother from years ago that my father never did anything with, and it's listed on the New Jersey unclaimed property site.
Yeah.
And you have
Yeah.
to provide like documentation and stuff. It's not like you can just go say, "Hey, this is my relative and I want this."
Hey, there's $1 million here. Can I have that? I
Yeah.
found it. Um, what about you, Barb? Any interesting stories or thoughts? I mean, that people should be thinking about that probably they're not thinking about.
Well, it's just really time consuming. My uncle, my husband's uncle, who passed away a couple of years ago, no computer, no centralized record keeping, not a wealthy man, but an estate, a mid six figure, low six figure estate. So really something. Um, we had to search so many different places because he'd have many, many accounts with like a few $1,000s in it. And so going through that, fortunately, his statements did not go online because he did not have a computer. So eventually we got all of his statements, but then you have to go through and you have to contact everyone and you have to say, here is the death certificate. Here is a copy of the will. This is who gets what. And it is so, so time consuming. And so I really tell really everyone should have a will who's an adult. And if you have kids and you have a decent amount of assets, yeah, you do probably want a revocable living trust. But then keeping track of your assets. Now, I did see something online where you can buy this kit and it gives you a bunch of folders and it tells you what to do. I mean, look, that's one way to go. I am in the process. I have to laugh at you, Kirk, who's like, you looked at it and it's like, I'm not doing this. Well, I'm in the process of trying to organize every account, but not only that, if you're in a partnership and one person, say, handles all of the house stuff, like the insurance and the bills and all that, and the other person knows nothing, well, you've got to make that stuff clear for your partner because when you go, they're not going to know what to do. I mean, they won't, they might not even know where the checkbook is. And so I'm in the process of spelling all of that out, not only for just these are the accounts, these are, this is the code to my password manager, um, and this is where the money is, but this is how you keep the rest of the house running and the rest of our family going, if I'm not here.
Yeah, no, it's good. So Phil, I also want to ask how should people be thinking about this generationally? Because I know, you're an advisor as well, and when people are going through thinking about this, like how should people be like what kind of framework should people be using in thinking about generational transfer of wealth?
So it really, a lot of it depends on the amount of your wealth, because if we think about the estate tax rules, if people think that they pay a lot in individual taxes, the estate taxes can be even worse because the brackets go up really quickly. There is a big exclusion under current law, and you can move assets during your lifetime. We hear about the annual gift exclusion, which is currently $19,000. And if you're a couple, you can give away $38,000 to the same person. But you can give away more than that. Just have to know that that means you have to file a gift tax return, and a gift tax return is not hard to file. It's just information. But you've got, as a couple, I want to say it's like $26 million roughly of exemption. If I go over that 38, and let's say I gave away $100,000, well, I have to file a gift tax return, and then 62 of that eats into my lifetime estate exemption. But it's things like that. But also, there's lots of planning. Like, I talk to people about the idea that if you have IRAs, there's reasons to convert them now for you as a couple because of how tax rates work. But then think about it. When you pass, there's only going to be one, and the survivor is going to still have the same combined RMD if you give them the money. But now they're going to be in single tax brackets, so their rate's going to go up. And then if you think about passing it on to your kids, well, in an IRA, you have 10 years to get the money out. And as you pull it out, you pay tax. If it's in a Roth IRA, when you pull it out, there's no taxes paid, and there's no RMDs required. They still have to empty the Roth IRA in 10 years. But if they didn't need the money, it could sit there. And even if they do, they can pull it out tax free. So there's lots, you want to think about how it's taxed at each level along the way. That's something that's important. It's also important, I think, to have some type of family meeting about these things so that people know what your intentions are, what you're going to do, so that hopefully there's no fights and arguments when you're gone. Sometimes if you have a significant amount of wealth, you might want to do something like a generation skipping transfer. So that way it skips one generation and goes to the one after that. Because if the one in the middle has sizable assets, it may make sense to just give it on to the next generation. Now you can put it in trust and put limitations around when they can use it and things like that. But there's lots of important things to consider when you're deciding how to dispose those assets. But taxes are really important. And, I mentioned those Roth conversions. The other benefit that they can have is that it really takes the money. If you have a big estate, it takes the money out, right? Because I'm paying the tax now. And I'm giving basically after tax dollars. So there's lots of planning that can be done around this too that you want to think about as you're going through this process.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the biggest challenges that I see is that there's so many different aspects of this when it gets into, um, wealth. And, we look at things in four quadrants. There's cash flow management, there's tax planning, investment management, estate preservation. And, there's different aspects of all those that come into play. And one of the things that I'm curious about, and I want to get your opinion, Barb, is let's say somebody's listening to this podcast and they're a very good investor, right? They know what they're doing, they're skilled, they built wealth over the last 40 years, through real estate or the stock market, whatever it is. They feel like, all right, this is great. But then when they think about it, they realize, well, my kids can't tie their shoes and, they don't have any interest in investing. They don't want to learn all the stuff that I know. So how are they ever going to manage this wealth that's going to be passed down? And so how do you suggest people think about that? Like, should they find different allocations that are more idiot proof? Should they, find advisors? Should they, try to, I mean, what's teach their kids? Like, what do you think people should be doing that are looking to pass along wealth?
That is such an important question. And many, many, many people will be dealing with that or are dealing with that. And I think there's several paths you can do. One is you just make your assets really simple. I have a good friend who has like a $7 million portfolio, and he has the majority of it invested in one diversified fund that covers stocks, bonds, US, international. That is it for almost his entire portfolio. I have another friend, again, who's wealthy as well, who has like four index funds for all of his portfolio. That's one way to go because that can be managed by anybody. Two other options I suggest are have a backup of a financial advisor. You have that built in, or you tell your kids or whatever. Look, if you can't handle it, this is someone I recommend. Have them manage the money for you. Or put a bulk of it in something like a robo advisor, which has low or no fees, and they will keep your portfolio nicely diversified. So there are a lot of options, but you have to think about it now. And you have to think about it while you have your mentation. And so again, it's just another arm of the planning.
Great. So as we kind of wrap it up here, Phil, final thoughts from you on this really important topic.
So another thing I just want to get back to is, complexity. And it's not just what you own, but it's also how many accounts you have. I know that over time, we can easily accumulate a lot of accounts. When I was younger, I used to think it was great when we had really high commissions and I had DRIPs, dividend reinvestment plans, where I would get shares of stock from a company, and it would be through somebody like Computer Share or something like that. But I would have one account for shares of one stock. And you have 401ks if you switch jobs and things like that, and you accumulate all these accounts. Well, I'll tell you now, all those drips are gone. I just rolled them into one taxable account. The old 401ks, they're rolled into one account because just like you want to declutter your house to an extent so that it's easier for your kids to go through your things when you pass, you also want to think about simplifying your financial life. And if you've got 20 different accounts, that's a lot more work for you and for somebody else to take care of. So I think it's really important to just consider how to declutter. And I just also want to emphasize, because I have a friend that always reminds me of this. We talked about the healthcare power of attorney. Like, that's not just for your kids when they go to college, it's for you too. You want to make sure that you think of that. So if something happens to you, it's not just your money that you're worried about it, but it's also you. Who's going to make decisions if you're in the unfortunate position where you can no longer make decisions for yourself? That's also an important part of this process. You want to have your healthcare proxy, somebody that's there that can make those decisions. If you don't want to get resuscitated or something like that, you have to make sure people know and you've had those conversations that they know what to do and they don't go through tremendous means to prolong your life when that's not really something that you wanted because you want to maintain your quality of life. So you need to think about that too. Um, as for me, my firm is Apprise Wealth Management. I know that experiencing big life transitions can be stressful. My job is to help empower women facing new beginnings with the financial knowledge and tools they need to make self-assured decisions. My firm's Apprise Wealth Management. We'd love to get to know you. You can go to our website to download a free copy of 5 Things Every Woman Should Know About Finances. Do that by going to apprisewealth.com That's APPRISE wealth.com/5-things. Thanks for having me today, Kirk. It's an important conversation.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Phil, and sharing your wisdom with us. Barb, final thoughts from you.
You do want to simplify your accounts. You don't want 20 different accounts. But there's another flip side to that of having only one or two accounts at the same financial outlet. I've been listening recently to some podcasts and videos, but interviewing Jeffrey Hinton, who was one of the founders of AI. And he's not a financial guy, but he knows a lot about AI. And he reminded me of something that I kind of thought intuitively, which is you may not want to have all of your accounts at one place, like at Schwab or at Fidelity or whatever. The likelihood of something happening to one company, they have a lot of excess insurance up to millions of dollars, but you just don't know the future. You don't know what's going to happen to AI or to hacking. And I don't want to be a fear monger here. But I think if you have a large enough estate, you may want to, yes, minimize the number of counts, but also consider having accounts in more than one financial institution, just to be on the safe side for the what ifs. So I am Barbara Friedberg. You can find me on YouTube and at Barbara Friedberg Personal Finance.
Great. Thanks for coming on, Barb, and sharing your wisdom with us as well. That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.